unknowns. What do they want? Are we about to come face to face with them, whether we're ready or not? Find out from the world's leading experts in this very special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio.
You're listening to RNN Radio, where thinking people tune in.
Well, this is the Raiders Live News Talk Radio Show. I'm your host, Thomas Horn, and of course, as always, I'm joined in the studio by that much sought-after horse whisperer, Nita. And who else but the wild man, that Stratocaster Wrecking Joe artist? Well, we welcome you back to this special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio on the timely subject in this special edition, official disclosure. Prepare for contact. Now, it's our privilege this morning to spend the next hour with inventor and host of the popular radio program Futurequake, Dr. J. Michael Bennet. Dr. Bennett's daily radio program Futurequake airs from WENO AM 760 in Nashville, Tennessee, with a listenership also further extending around the world via the World Wide Web. Dr. Bennett's vocational career has been grounded in the field of science, having earned a doctorate in mechanical engineering from the University of Dayton and having served for 16 years as a team leader in U.S. military laboratories. He currently operates his own technology development and consulting company with many of his 15 patented inventions having been brought to market. In fact, his work's been profiled in media like the Wall Street Journal, the NBC Nightly News, CNN Future Watch. Furthermore, he has shared his biblical analysis on prominent forums such as Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, in speaking engagements such as the 2009 Ancient of Days First Christian Conference on Aliens, and even as a keynote speaker for the United Nations for their 2008 Conference on Religion and Spirituality. But we want to ask him today how all or part of his expertise is connected to this question: are we alone in the universe? So, from near the home of the Grand Ole Opry itself, Nashville, Tennessee, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio, Dr. J. Michael Bennet. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be with you and your audience.
Well, it's so good to have you on. By the way, has it warmed up there in Nashville?
It is just on the advent of warming up. Within the next 48 hours, it may be habitable outside. So,
you have ice on the ground?
No ice on the ground. We've got bright sunshine right now, just a little chilly outside, but spring is around the corner. So we're at a time of many changes in many different ways right now in the world.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at that sun finally peeking out there. It warmed up to, 20 degrees or something, and we all went sunbathing. A lot of territory to cover this morning, and I want to talk to you in particular about some of your research into this area of extraterrestrials, or more appropriately, in my opinion, probably extra-dimensionals, but we'll let you talk about that. To begin the discussion, I want you to elaborate a bit more about yourself. Tell people about your scientific, business, academic credentials, your spiritual history. What is it to know Dr. Michael Bennet?
Well, you covered a lot of the information about my credentials and my career itself. I'm a person of science. I'm used to using the scientific method, publishing in academic journals, where one has to really do one's homework, be able to understand the cause and effect, use the scientific principles and scientific laws, and produce work that survives academic and professional muster in that area. One thing I am not is a theologian. I'm a student of the Bible. I love the Bible. And many others who speak in this area, at best I can stand on their shoulders and maybe add a little bit to it. But I find that people like myself who come from a science background can add a unique dimension to the theologians in understanding some of these issues that we talk about. And I have personally been benefited from others from similar veins and backgrounds who've added their own unique take in understanding the phenomena we see around us from a biblical worldview. As far as my spiritual background, I was raised in about as traditional an evangelical environment as anyone could. In fact, you could probably call me an evangelical square. I was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition. in church, raised in wonderful Bible-believing churches, and continue to do so. I even was able to attend Christian education in high school in a Church of Christ-based school system, and just had a wonderful cloud of witnesses around me theologically in my upbringing itself. And so I bring that particular background and context to how I understand these issues, and hopefully I can serve as maybe an interpreter of some of these complex matters, including things in the Bible that we don't always hear about in all of our churches, to help others understand from a similar background to me what's really going on from a biblical worldview we can relate to.
Hi, Dr. Future. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, Nita. It's wonderful to hear from you.
It's good to have you on this morning. I wanted to ask what the reason is that you developed a personal interest in this topic of UFO issue and disclosure. What was the reason?
Well, I have to confess to you that I somewhat resisted it for a long time, particularly tying the spiritual to the issue. I think most people, particularly young men my age, growing up in the space era, always had a little fascination when we would hear remote pieces of information. It might have been a comic book or some magazine on a rack about UFOs, and it was a gee whiz factor that always just fascinated our minds. And again, growing up under a space program, you thought the sky and space was literally the limit on what we might learn. But it wasn't always a connection, again, spiritually. And even back when I was young, the mass media that would have movies on these topics didn't really connect the two for a long time. But as I got older, I developed an interest in Bible prophecy. It was not a topic that was discussed much in my church circles, but I, like millions of other people, came across a book called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, and I, like others, will always owe a debt to him for stimulating an interest in understanding what was going on in the world around me and how it might be explained in the pages of the Bible itself. And so through that background and interest in prophecy and trying to gather information, as the advent of the Internet began, I started bumping into information from isolated sources like David Flynn and others that said there might be a connection in this UFO phenomena and religious, spiritual issues that were discussed in the Bible, and particularly about the end times. And that really caught my ear, but it was not something one would feel comfortable talking to the average person in the church pew next to you. So I just very discreetly and occasionally would gather information. But a big turning point to me was in the summer of 2005, when I had the privilege to attend the Ancient of Days conference in Roswell, New Mexico, run by Guy Malone, and having a number of Christian theologians, prominent theologians, that had dedicated their time and energy to trying to connect the dots on what the Bible might have to say on this very, very complicated and almost taboo issue. And from that point forward, things changed dramatically for me. I just started the Future Quake radio show in the spring of 2005, and found it as an opportunity to bring many of these other alternative voices in the world of theology to broach this topic. And Future Quake became a place where very difficult, controversial, taboo topics like this can be discussed in a respectful manner with a biblical basis.
Hey, Mike, we're going to be talking to Guy Malone here in about 2 hours, and as you know, he is a past experiencer, emphasis on past, which opens this debate to something potentially more than advanced technology. Some of the people that we've been talking to who are scientists have kind of a nuts and bolts approach to this. They don't really view it as having any spiritual connotation other than the fact that it might affect people's particular mythos or faith. What explanations about the UFO and or alien phenomenon historically have made the most sense to you as a real phenomenon? And then after you answer that, I want to ask you about the spiritual side of it.
You know, as an engineer, I would have a natural inclination to want to have physical explanations entirely, because my background is in combustion and my field in propulsion systems, and I would be fascinated to figure out how aliens could travel across space and things like this. And I have to confess to you that I still, in many areas of background research, am a neophyte in collecting certain key documents and understanding what the forefathers have done in this field. But one that comes to mind is a gentleman named Jacques Vallée, who's often cited frequently. I believe he was portrayed in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind with a character representation. And he made it very clear, as a gentleman who had a relatively unimpeachable reputation in the field of people from all aspects of the UFO issue, that he came to the conclusion, studying it exhaustively, that it could not be explained by mere physical means. And some of the findings that I recollect he has found is that the mannerisms of the beings that were either observed in the sky or their personal contact, people's confessions and testimonies of their contact with them, was that they tended to be very deceptive in nature. They were suspected of having malevolent intent in their activities, however, that they were not entirely physical in their components. And I believe he compared them in many cases to the demons of old, what were described as demonic activities in the Middle Ages and even in the ancient days. And that leads you to several different conclusions. Either one could say that the demons that were described in the ancient days were actually encounters with physical beings and that they were misunderstood to be demonic creatures by primitive man, or the counter is that today we're actually contacting spiritual demonic beings that were also recognized and understood by ancient man as well. And that's really the crux of the issue. But as far as really putting to bed the purely physical explanation, I think Chuck Missler did it the best for me in his book, I believe it's called Alien Encounters. He describes, he's also a person of science background as well, where he describes the physical behavior of these aerial apparitions, where they would suddenly blink into existence, blink out, streak across the sky instantaneously. And he shows very clearly in the illustration that is easily explained if one is in an extra-dimensional plane that pops into our three-dimensional existence. And he uses a two-dimensional plane to actually give illustrations. And the light bulb came on, and it was very clear that an extra-dimensional approach would create these sudden disappearances in our space-time frame, sudden movements and things. And so that became very convincing to me, in addition with the other data, that there's this other component. And, of course, other writers have studied some of the other similar facets as well, including these diabolical intentions they have and even some of the very ancient intentions that they have that have been recorded over the ages.
Yeah, Dr. Missler, we've interviewed him before, and he's following you actually this hour, this morning again. I love in his book, Alien Encounters, where he talks about Mr. and Mrs. Flat and their two-dimensional world and what the effect upon them would be to discover us three-dimensionals and how outside the paradigm of their technological understanding we would seem to exist, and then you extrapolate that forward to what if fifth or sixth or 10th or whatever dimensional beings were somehow moving in and out of our reality. It also to us would seem to be a technology that we simply can't comprehend. And of course your field is in technology, and in fact some of your inventions in propulsion, aren't they being used now by the U.S. and Israeli military?
Well, most of my technologies are based upon protective technologies in nature, and in fact sometimes even harnessing propulsive chemistry like rocket technology, but harnessing it in a means by which to provide safety for people. It is being used in a military component right now to protect our men that are deployed overseas right now, and being used in numerous areas. I've had some international involvement with scientists in Russia, in some other secret cities in Australia and elsewhere, and even in Israel more recently, which was a fascinating opportunity to spend time in the Holy Land, a place that has seen many of their own UFO sightings and have a direct geographical connection to what we think some of the answers would be regarding the origin of these creatures or beings.
Yeah. Now, in addition to abduction and manifestations such as UFOs and or the aliens themselves, with the appearance of these entities, there also seems to be a message that they are consistently delivering. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Well, the message is very important, and for those who see what they perceive to be the beneficial aspects of contact with these beings, the message is the critical component. Of course, individuals feel special when they've been selected to have contact with these beings, but what they're told to take away is a message to deliver. And the general message, if you had to describe it in a nutshell, it's a consistent theme. It's the theme of basically we can become gods. We can become gods like them, like the visitors who come to us, and they will help us ascend to it. and there's a process that we can do to ascend to it with their help, and they can illuminate us on information that we are not privy to right now, and this information will stop wars, stop our need for food and energy needs, and will take us to this higher level of deification. And I find it ironic that this message is exactly the message given by the serpent we read in the Bible in the Garden of Eden. The message, he says, that we would become like gods and that our eyes would be opened or illuminated, is literally the oldest message in human history given to us by anyone other than God. And mankind fell for it then, and he continues to fall for it today. And one of the other interesting aspects in their elaboration of this is that they further clarify in this information that's even been recorded by the ancients and has been come back into vogue now in modern days. The message on the ancient tablets is that they switch the roles, the benevolent roles of the creator and the rebel to the creator itself. For example, in ancient Sumeria, we have the gods Enki and Enlil, and Enlil is perceived as a creator god over earth, but it largely does not care over his creation or even the well-being of humanity, where Enki comes along as a type of rebel god, tries to elevate the position of man, and actually confronts Enlil to be able to provide that relationship with mankind. And that reoccurs over and over again in cultures that stemmed out of that Sumerian background. So basically you have two stories. You have the biblical story about a benevolent creator God, a rebel who tries to bring the fall of the crown of his creation, humanity, or you have the alternative view that this Satan, Lucifer, Lightbringer, is attempting to co-opt mankind into a successful rebellion against an evil creator God, or what's called, I believe, a demiurge. So that's really where things boil down to. And then, of course, you see the obvious template with the Eastern New Age teachings. They teach the same type things, that Godhead is obtainable, that it is available without admission of sin or any other kind of payment for your sin that's required. They do not recognize that we're in any kind of fallen state that needs deliverance, particularly from an external deity, or that there's any final judgment after death for us as individuals or for the world in general. And you can see this message not only in the Far East, but if you look at Western mystics like Dr. John Dee, we see the Gnostics in the Middle East teaching this in ancient days. Aleister Crowley, the Tibetan monks who then even came to the West, came to Nazi Germany and taught this teaching, which led to the development of the SS and others. And now we call it the New Age movement. But basically they have co-opted this whole study and idea of the alien visitors, that they are creatures that are advanced like avatars, what they would describe avatars in the Far East, who have come down, and basically they're merging science and religion, where the lines blur, where one begins and the other one stops, and they become one big amorphous power structure. And they believe that they are coming back to help those who accept them to advance to the next state, and basically get rid of the rest of the people who choose not to advance. And that's the essence of basically what their story is.
Now, at your UN lecture on religion and spirituality, were there some of the speakers there that addressed kind of this concept, the idea of ET and advanced religion?
You know, yes, there was. And what's fascinating when you think about that is that it was a conference endorsed and underwritten by the United Nations, which is typically presumed to be a non-religious entity, and then the World Council of Churches, which is presumed to be a Christian organization, being Christian churches. But a major component of their teaching, and in fact they're creating a new world religion as a part of this called the Order of the Transfiguration, with a mission to create a new humanity for a new world order by their own slogan. A large component was the UFO savior belief system. Very prominent, worldwide known figures that teach in this area were a part of it, and they were teaching that this ascension was an ideal part of it, with, I interpret it to be the tacit approval of the United Nations, including UN representatives that were there during their talks, as well as some of these other large-scale global Christian organizations that endorse this particular teaching.
Mike, it's Joe here. It's good to talk to you again.
It's wonderful to talk to you.
Hey, why do you think there appears to be a rapid increase in UFO sightings in the recent years?
Well, to look at things objectively, I think you have to admit that with the increased exposure in commentary and mass media. That is going to heighten people's awareness about what's going on. There is so much on television about it that not only does it make people more aware, but it is starting to erode the stigma of coming forward and saying that you've had some kind of experience. We even have political figures that say they've seen UFOs. So now people are starting to open up and be more aware of it. In fact, even more false sightings, I think, could be created because of this. But aside from all that, the people who have received messages up to this point, or say they have, and have presented their information, said that there would be a large increase in these type of things, and that it was expected that this would increase to a large extent. And there are some other things that happen in world history that may also have accelerated this view. It's according to what our whole understanding of what the cause is. We entered the atomic age back in the middle of the 20th century, and simultaneous with that, we see a dramatic increase in UFO sightings, from the initial test sites to even nuclear launch missile silos. UFOs are reported. Our space program, we've had UFOs reported over space launch sites. So it may be things of our own doing as well. But in addition to that, there was a big turn in the middle of the 20th century, within about a 3 or 4 year window, of things of extreme importance, events from a spiritual and an occult standpoint. We had occult workings like the Babylon working that occurred, being led by the father of the American space program, Jack Parsons, along with L. Ron Hubbard, founder of the new religion Scientology, welcoming in the great whore Babylon as a consort for the Antichrist at the same time. We have the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls in this same window of time, along with the Book of Enoch, which gives an ancient explanation of what may be the manifestation of these particular beings that are appearing. We have the founding of the nation of Israel, and in fact it has been a type of magnet to attract these UFO sightings as well within the nation of Israel. So world history took a dramatic turn in the middle of the 20th century at the end of World War II, and it seems like it's reflected in the heavenlies as well. And of course, to conclude, I have to say that the Bible itself says that many signs and wonders in the sky will greatly appear as part of the birth pangs at the advent of the last days, and that's yet more evidence that we may be entering the last days as well, as judged from the Bible.
It's interesting that you bring up Crowley's Babylon working, followed by Parsons. They were also trying to open the same kind of a doorway to bring something through, right?
That's exactly right. It was an activity, a portal. Crowley did his, I think it's called the Alamantra working, earlier in the century, more closely to the time of World War I.
That's right.
And actually brought forward, as you know, a being who he illustrated to look almost identical to what we associate with alien grace, and provided information that then became a religion. And one of his disciples, Jack Parsons, was the one who took things further to try to bring in the era of Antichrist further, or what he called the dawn of Horus as well, too. So with the history of the world in the 20th century was written, you have an overt history written, and then you have a covert history from the occultist, from spiritual activities and the work of God that go hand in hand to explain what we see today.
Now, given the fact that, this implies a deep and dark and sinister and secret supernaturalism, does, in your opinion, does the Bible talk about this phenomenon, what we refer to as UFOs or aliens, but does the Bible give hints as to this phenomenon's true nature?
Well, let me mention something that is becoming more understood by researchers that have advanced, and maybe some of your other interviewees may explain on this, and then add you a few things of my own that I'm looking at. First of all, the passage in Genesis chapter 6 that the ancients clearly understood, the Jews, the early church, understood that fallen creatures that originally had rebelled with Satan himself, powerful angelic beings, are said to have come down to earth, cohabitated with human women, and created an offspring that created terrible days of horrible suffering, depravity, and wickedness on earth, so bad that it says that God's hand was virtually forced to destroy the beings that existed on earth at the time. and to preserve the bloodline of the kinsman redeemer as promised in the book of Genesis through the line of Noah, to be able to save and salvage humanity. And that understanding, which is an old understanding of the Bible, not only explains so much on why God had to bring the devastating flood, why did he have to clear out the people of Canaan that had this particular fallen state bloodline, which was prominently displayed in the people there, answers so many questions that people have had that have been a roadblock to their accepting the God of the Bible. And that's a very important thing that we see established in the fact that other ancient texts that were accepted, in fact, even the Book of Enoch, which is accepted by the Ethiopian Church today, go further and talk about genetic manipulations between these beings and human beings, or between humans, or even between humans and animals, that created these kind of creatures, what we would call something akin to genetic manipulation today, that were an abhorrence to God, which is what he expressly forbid in the Old Testament, and created judgment itself. And there's many, many deep theories on were they attempting to create beings that they could cohabitate their spirit in, and other things. But the remarkable correlation we see is how much it is similar to the abduction events that we see occurring today, where reproductive experiments are going on, genetic experiments repeated over and over again. And if you can believe pollsters like George Gallup and others, a significant percentage of the entire American public stands by their testimony that they have experienced an event such as this. It is a shocking piece of data to understand that. But if you've got the time, I'd like to just share something further, another element that I believe may shed further light as well, too, particularly the aerial apparitions that we see. I am coming to believe and be of the persuasion that the fig allegory that's shown repeatedly in the Bible is actually a representation of these fallen rebel powers that fell along with Satan before we ever came along. And in fact, to undergird that position, the Jews always believed and taught that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where this particular fallen information was provided to humanity via Satan, was actually a fig tree, which certainly explains why they would use fig leaves to actually sew clothes for themselves because of this. But they associate the fig tree with that. And if you study about the fig tree, you find out that it is called in the Middle East a false fruit. And this false fruit does not reproduce itself. It actually has to be artificially inseminated by insects. A fig wasp actually artificially inseminates and creates the further growth of additional figs and things like this, which I find is very interesting when we reflect on this activity of the fallen spirits and their artificial genetic manipulation and reproduction itself. Now, when you look in the sixth seal in the book of Revelation, it says at the sixth seal that the stars are cast down to earth like figs shaken from a fig tree when they're ripe. And it's elsewhere explained that these stars are angelic beings, elsewhere in the book of Revelation. And in fact, to further reinforcement, I believe it's in Isaiah 34, the same passage is also talked about, and it calls them heavenly hosts that are thrown from the sky like figs from a fig tree when it's ripe. Now, Jesus also recites that same passage in his famous passage, I believe in Matthew 24, about the last days and what will occur. He also refers about them falling like figs for a fig tree. And then a few verses later, he mentions a parable of the fig tree. Now, many people interpret that parable of the fig tree to be talking about Israel, which I don't see any indication why we should construe it as such. In fact, Paul and others clearly show Israel to be an olive tree, and are repeatedly show Israel as a representation of such. But I would conjecture that these figs, again, may be referring to these heavenly powers. And in fact, the parable of the fig tree, about saying when you see the leaves coming tender and ripe, look up, is that this parable suggests that these tender buds could be the initial isolated sightings of the heavenly host being thrown down. And it says that men's hearts will fail them for what they see coming on the earth. So I think it may be a description of these isolated cases of UFOs that we see in these apparitions in the sky as the initial budding of the fig tree that's the advent of the last days itself. And other writers, in fact, Barry Kamish, who is an Israeli writer, writes a lot of well-known investigative work. He wrote a very different work called Return of the Giants, where he actually investigated the UFO flap that occurred in 1997, of rampant sightings of UFOs. And the people he interviewed that saw these from all aspects of the culture said that they actually saw giants walking through the land immediately after sightings in certain areas of these UFOs itself. So there's more than actually meets the eye in what's going on with this. And in conclusion, I would just say that if you remember, Jesus cursed a fig tree when he was coming up to Jerusalem, and many have thought that referred to Israel or the leadership itself. But I would submit that it may refer to a cursing of the fig tree and the heavenly hosts that were operating the nations of earth up to that time, and that Jesus was speaking directly to the heavenly host and powers, that their days are coming to an end, and he is going to overthrow their dominion over the nations of the earth. So I think this fig tree analogy may give us some insight on what we're seeing today.
That's a very interesting theory. I would love to hear a further elaboration upon that, or if you ever put it in the form of an article, would love to publish it. So, yeah, you've got my interest up. I want to ask you how the issue of ETI, astrobiology, our hope to make contact, how this is now, not just in the future, but now already impacting the religious community worldwide, and could potentially do even more so in the very near future. You know, the Vatican astronomers like Father Jose Gabriel Funes, he's been out there talking about how there's a certain possibility of intelligent life in the universe. Before him, you had Vatican astronomer Guy Cosmonalgo. Before that, in fact, Monsignor Corrado Balducci went so far as to say that not only is there a possibility, but that ETs were already on Earth and already in contact, and that some of the people in the highest levels of the Vatican are aware of it. And when we interviewed Nick Pope, the former mod director for their UFO department for Britain, he said that he knows Father Balducci and believes that he is a very, very sincere man, not a flake. And then, of course, before that, the famous prophecy of Father Malachi Martin. So at least the Vatican seems to be preparing themselves for this. What do you make of it?
Well, you're such a learned person on this that the little additional I can add is almost like casting swine before pearls. But I can make a few comments here about this. We mentioned this triple IHS conference for the United Nations, the International Institute of Integral Human Sciences. They fully embrace this concept of UFO saviors and the message with the tacit endorsement, like I've said before, of the World Council of Churches. So I would expect this information is going to begin to percolate into our churches, even maybe our evangelical churches, in the days ahead. The Vatican appears to be leading the way. And if what I suspect, I'm not of the Catholic faith, but what I suspect based upon prior history is that the Catholic Church will be fine with anything like this if little green men show up or whatever, as long as they acquiesce to Rome and the power of Rome. So I think Rome is taking an early position of authority to be, when the ET say, take me to your leader, they want to be in the position of leader for these things, to be able to lead what's going on and to prepare their flock to believe that they can accommodate this and have answers for it itself. One other thing that just is something out of left field that I'd like to mention that I think may be significant in the days ahead. We have a number of new churches being formed that are called DMT churches, and they're available throughout the country. And DMT is a acronym for a particular chemical that has been shown reliably to contact the spirit realm and to have events, what we would say, akin to ET encounters or abduction events. And do you have a moment for me to comment on that?
Sure.
Well, I think it becomes very important because DMT is an active ingredient they have found that the shamans in Central and South America have used for them to contact the spirit world to find solutions for sicknesses and illnesses for millennia through something they call ayahuasca tea. Well, now modern man has decided they want to take their own scientific approach to replicating that. And one very important study was done a number of years ago by Dr. Rick Strassman, and it was a formal clinical study done through the University of New Mexico, where they used, under very controlled conditions, this chemical DMT, gave it to subjects who were completely unfamiliar with the kind of things we're talking about today. They were pre-screened. And what they found within seconds of administering this drug is that they immediately encountered beings that we would describe the alien grays, and had something that was identical to an alien abduction experiment, including having their bodies taken over, reproductive experiments done on them. Some were even raped, had other assaults done to them. They saw reptilian and insectoid characters. But the testimonies of the independent people who had this, individual subjects, were virtually identical in the views that they had. And these people were not aware of the UFOs or other information by earlier testimony prior to these tests. It was shocking information that came out, but their experiences were so horrific that they had to form a support group for these subjects because their emotions, their psychology was shaken by what they experienced itself. And now mankind, in their thirst always to find what's new and forbidden territory, are now forming churches where they actually make a religious ritual out of ingesting the substance and having these events. And I would suggest our listeners also check out, there's an article you can find online from a National Geographic reporter where they went into the jungle, went through one of these ceremonies ingesting the DMT in the jungle, and they had an experience of actually falling down what you would describe as into hell. This person was an atheist, did not embrace religion, but they fell past all these fallen souls that were calling out for redemption and rescue. They fell before 3 thrones in Abyss area. They were told they could never leave and that they were judged. And as part of the ceremony, there was a process of trying to bring these people back from this experience. And it forever changed the person who wrote the article. And there's experiences like this on and on again. But the connection to the experience of seeing these beings, an abduction event, and a spiritual transcendent experience is very important for people to keep in mind, as opposed to beings from some other planet. And one of the keys about DMT they found is they believe it involves something called the pineal gland, which is right in the base of the brain, right between the eyes, or in the forehead area. And this pineal gland produces DMT, but we do not have these experiences because a chemical in the stomach neutralizes it. And so you have to take an excess amount intentionally to be able to have this experience. And I've speculated if, in fact, this neutralizing chemical was not something that mankind was given at the time they were banished from the garden, something akin to the cherub with the flaming sword, to keep this direct contact, not only with God, but with Satan and his forces as well, a barrier to attempt to protect us. And the whole concept of sorcery in the ancient world was to use chemicals to be able to break this barrier and to reopen the portals that had been closed. And now we're finding a whole new advent of being able to do that by using this. And the pineal gland is considered to be the key point. But the fact that it is in the forehead area is very important when you look at it biblically, because the word forehead in the New Testament, I believe, is only used in the book of Revelation. And it is always in the context of using a seal that is placed over the forehead to keep spiritual forces from the other side from getting their hands on particular individuals on earth. You see God putting a seal on the forehead of his servants right before the abyss opens. And the creatures of the abyss can attack everything on earth except those whose foreheads are sealed. We also see Satan putting his seal through the Antichrist on his own with the mark of the beast, which they're forever doomed to be part of his dominion. And then at the end of the Bible, we see God actually putting his seal on his servants, his own name on their foreheads to seal them for eternity. So there's something going on within our physiology, and like René Descartes said, this pineal gland may be the portal that opens up this opening, and now mankind is aggressively trying to find out how to open that portal. And furthermore, if I've got a moment to elaborate further,
go ahead.
There are other chemicals that have similar effects, and one that I'm currently studying now, and this is new information that I'm uncovering, and we'll be speaking about at the the Last Days 2010 conference next month, is that another popular chemical that created these events was something called absinthe, which was an alcoholic type of beverage that was all the rage, particularly in the ancient world, but particularly in the 1800s, the turn of the 20th century. It was eventually outlawed as the only alcohol that was outlawed worldwide because it had a severe impact on people beyond regular alcoholism. But it was used by bohemian authors, writers, artists, because it said it helped them contact their muses, or the spirits on the other side that would enlighten them in information they couldn't reach. In fact, Aleister Crowley was a devotee of the use of absinthe. He called it the green fairy or the green goddess. He wrote about it as a reliable portal to the spirit world. And the interesting thing is this material, the key on how it's produced, is a distillation of the wormwood plant. And the wormwood plant, the official name is the Artemis absinthium plant. And as you study further on where that name came along, Artemis was associated, as you know, you're an expert in these areas of mythology, was a female deity also associated with Hecate. And Hecate was the spirit that controlled the portals of the spirit world itself. Also was associated with flame, fire, torches. But this Hecate creature controlled who passed through the spirit world at the time. And in fact, this word absinthe or absinthium is literally out of the New Testament in the book of Revelation. When you see wormwood, it was actually described in the Greek as absinthium, is actually thrown down and cast to earth. Mm-hmm. And I think this is critically important because many have assumed that wormwood was a planet that's returning or something that's thrown down into the sea that ruins the waters. But I am now of a speculation that wormwood may actually be a character, a person, an angelic host known in the ancient world as Artemis, who in fact was the sister of Apollo. Mm-hmm. And actually that this person may be cast down, and when the Bible says it was thrown on many waters, these same waters are interpreted later in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 17, by the angel as representing tribes and peoples and nations of the earth. And it says it will afflict 1/3 of the waters itself. And as a result of this, many people will die as a result. So if we're not looking at something that's going into physical water that's poisoning people, an alternative explanation could be that when this creature who controls the portal comes down, could actually affect 1/3 of humanity and result in widespread death as a result. And I can't help but think about Russ Dizdar and his work of the Black Awakening, where he says that a large part of our public are satanic sleeper cells that will be awakened in the last days to create widespread bloodshed across the earth. And I wonder if, in fact, this passage may reflect something akin to that, and that, in fact, the massive loss of life would be something like a large-scale blood sacrifice that would open the ultimate portal, because in the passage immediately after that, an angel goes with a key, and Hecate also was the goddess of keys, and this angel goes and opens the abyss and allows all of the infernal creatures from Tartarus to come forward, if in fact this would be an invocation type event to open it. So these are some things that I think that are important. I'm sorry if I got off the line.
No, I absolutely love it. In fact, I can feel you need to write a book and let me publish it. And you've also got some of my thoughts spinning as the relationship between this to ufology, where wormwood is cast into the sea, but a large part of ufology, in fact, some of the most mysterious parts of it, have to do with these manifestations being in the ocean, beneath the surface of the ocean, into the greatest depths of the seas. And of course the Bible has a lot to say. Job, goes down, or Jonah goes down into the belly of the earth, where the bars are, where there are things that are down there that are imprisoned. So we're going to have to talk some more about that. Listen, years ago there were studies by the government, others like those by Paul Davies of ASU, that suggested that ETI discovery might result in the complete collapse of society, and not just his studies, others, and they made comparisons, specifically citing how in history underdeveloped cultures tended to collapse historically whenever they were faced by far superior advanced in intelligence or whatever. But a poll in the last couple of weeks following these Royal Society meetings, a national poll now says that most religious people say that ETI disclosure would not significantly affect their faith. Now, first of all, do you think that's just wishful thinking, that we've watched so much Star Trek that we think we're ready but won't be if it actually happened? Do you think it's delusion, or do you think that society is really ready now for this coming armada of angel aliens?
Well, ready is a relative term. Ready in the sense that they don't completely come unglued is one thing, but ready in the sense to properly understand what they're encountering is a whole nother kettle of fish. I think there are several camps that I would assume people would fall into, even those who are religious. There are going to be many, even in the evangelical world, that are sort of materialistic, deterministic, and that will refuse to believe that even if they see convincing proof of what it is, that it is nothing other than some other biological entity. And so what they will have to adopt, if they only go that far, is that God could have creation beyond what we know of Earth, and to deal with that and accept that. And then there's going to be others that see the spiritual component. Many are already being groomed to accept this as a more broad and illuminated understanding of the message of the Bible. And many of the teachings have gone so far from a literal teaching of the Bible or even inerrancy of Scripture that it's only a half step to take what is taught in many churches and what these particular beings will be teaching, particularly if they make all sorts of promises of medicines to cure cancer and free energy and all these other kind of things to save. Many people, that's what they want out of the religious experience, even sitting in church. They don't understand much of doctrine beyond that right now. So there is going to be a group who are going to see, or maybe they've heard from listening to Raiders or some of our other materials, but have not yet embraced this spiritual connection. And they're going to have a crisis of faith when they hear that, because they've got to decide if what they heard previously was true or what they're hearing now. And then there's going to be a small minority of people, and that's what our mission is to increase the numbers of people who are forewarned, who have already been briefed on what the Bible has to say on this information, and can understand what's going on when we see it, and know a Trojan horse when we see it. And so I think there's going to be a broad response of people. But the other factors that influence this is that we're entering an era likely of extreme upheaval in every part of society. Economic upheaval, shortages of food, shortages of other essentials that we have. And when things get desperate, people are willing to accept anything. We see a modern, educated culture in Germany that accepted the incredibly crazy teachings of Adolf Hitler, malevolent teachings, because times were desperate. And as times get more desperate, I think we'll find people that are more willing to deal with this when they like the answers they think that are going to come from it.
Mike, this is Joe again. What do you think should be the proper response of the Christian community, today to this issue?
Well, I've alluded a little bit to it in this, but I think a key is doing what we're trying to show an example right now, is to discuss this issue head on. Don't be sheepish about it. Don't just clip around the fringes of it. Don't look down at the floor if somebody brings it up at church. We have a lot of leaders in our churches, very well-meaning, wonderful pastors that are trying to lead their flock correctly, and they're afraid to touch these kind of things because of the response. They don't realize that their parishioners are already talking about it around the kitchen tables, around small groups, even in their own church. They may be at Wednesday night dinner talking about some of these things they hear about in the news, but yet once the official Bible teaching starts, we hear nothing of it. And I think that has to change. It has to change for the people within the church to avoid their deception, and we have to make a statement to the world outside the church that we have answers. And I think concurrent with that, you're going to have to increase a teaching, a general teaching, the whole idea of spiritual warfare and the idea and concepts of the end times, which have been missing for a large extent, as part of the topic itself. People need to get some of the basics in those areas to be able to put what we're talking about in context itself. So the church is going to have to get real in a lot of these kind of things to be prepared for it. But also, on the positive light, I see this as an opportunity for evangelism. Mm-hmm. We know a large part of the world are asking these questions. That's why they're the number one things you see on the History Channel and Discovery Channel. It's everywhere in TV and books and movies. If you go to the movie theater, just about every sneak preview for a movie has something to do with the end times or something with UFOs. So the public has a fascination with that, and if somebody had real answers from what's going on, they might listen to the rest of the message. And so the church is missing an opportunity to add to their fold because of that. But one thing that is critical is that we're going to have to develop and then disseminate answers before all of this comes to pass. And that's why time is of the essence. It rings very hollow when the church tries to come up with answers after the fact to try to retreat back and try to defend their position. They need to go on the forward and say, anticipate these activities, anticipate these answers. Here are the motives of the people who say it, and here are the real answers of what they're about. Otherwise, it's going to really have a big impact on our credibility, and that includes refuting the doctrine. Most importantly, over the physical manifestations, we need to explain that the Bible shows in the cosmology what actually is occurring, but the message is also critically important. And while this message is untrustworthy, while we hear it frequently, we hear it on the Oprah show, we hear it on all sorts of manifestations, and worst of all in our churches. And those are the main things I think we need to be doing right now, and we need help. A handful of radio shows cannot do the job themselves, and authors and writers. People need to start disseminating this information in their church bodies and take a stand.
Well, and even pastors, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, unfortunately, the church is allowing the History Channel and Hollywood to be the people who are providing the answers to these contemporary issues. And I mean, look, you've got the Royal Society in England, you've got the Royal Astronomer that's got the Queen's ear standing up saying aliens might be staring us in the face and we can't even recognize them. You've got all these polls now showing that the large majority, including, by the way, Christians, are saying they could handle an ETI disclosure. There could be a massive setup underway, and the conservatives and evangelicals ought to be also not just leaving it to the Vatican, but they ought to be out there talking about this from their worldview, their point of view, and specifically how it may also play a role in eschatology. We're going to run out of time in about 5 minutes. Are you speaking anywhere on this subject, giving lectures?
Well, I gave you a little taste of some brand new research I'm doing, and I'll be talking about that at the Last Days 2010 conference right here in the greater Nashville area. If you go to last-days.net, you can actually find out about it. It'll be April 23rd and 24th. Wonderful speakers, people like Lynn Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Chris White, our own Tom Bionic, myself, Chris Pinto, and others will be speaking there. We've got a roster, Russ Dizdar, a roster of 8 speakers, a wonderful 2-day conference. It's very, very affordable, and for anybody from this part of the country, I think it's a must do. Who knows how many days we have? These kind of meetings may be banned or outlawed the way we see things in the public right now. So we need to get this information. The world gets their eschatology other places, and this will be a talk for another day. But if you go look at things like the Watchmen and other things that are taught, the occult world is getting their story out on how things are going to play out, including fake UFO landings that are intended to create world government. These are literally being taught to our young people right now, and we got to get our story together on what the real story is about.
Now, are you also speaking in Roswell?
Well, I haven't gotten all the details yet about Roswell. You might share a little bit more with me. I haven't seen much for this year published yet, so I always consider myself in standby mode. I fully support the work that's done with Guy Malone and all the other speakers there. It certainly had a huge impact on my life. The wonderful thing is that all of those DVDs are available at ancientofdays.net, where you can go back and get all the many years of talks and teaching. It's one of the wisest investments you'll ever make, is to get those DVDs, study them, and share them with people you know.
Now, you did speak at Roswell last year, right?
Last year I did, and had the privilege of giving a talk that was used as the initial keynote for the remaining speakers. Afterwards, I really did sort of a holistic discussion, very similar to what I gave in front of the United Nations, about the history of spirit communications with mankind and how they were recorded in world history, how they had an impact, what the Bible has to say about pursuing those communications. They don't take a kind eye to it in the Bible because of the dangers involved. And what are the origins of the messages that are given to these people and how it relates to the end times. And that's the basic crux of my discussion there.
Now, how can people learn more about you?
Well, I would love for them to drop by Future Quake. It's a radio show. We're getting ready to start our 6th year on air and our 600th live broadcast, our original broadcast of Future Quake. If you go to futurequake.com, anywhere in the world, and we have a lot of worldwide listeners, you go into the Past Shows tab. We have all 5 years of our archive shows there as MP3s you can download or listen to real time. We're also on iTunes as well. And we have a host of other things available. And in fact, there's a book there with a lot of the authors of people you're probably speaking to called How to Overcome the Most Frightening Issues You Will Face This Century. It's available for sale there. And a number of the people that you'll be interviewing now are authors in that book, and I highly recommend people get that book too as well.
We have been talking to businessman, inventor, host of the popular radio program FutureQuake, Dr. J. Michael Bennet. Mike, thank you so much for joining us for this special hour of official disclosure, Prepare for Contact special edition of the Raiders Live News Talk radio show.
Well, thank you for the privilege of being with you and your audience.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio. We'll continue in a moment. Don't go away.